morning we're continuing with Esther, and we're going to talk about everyday superheroes. But the first thing I want to do is I want to ask you if you had superheroes growing up. How many of you had superheroes? Let me see the hands of Superman's favorite. How about Batman? Ladies, how about Wonder Woman? Come on, you had to, if you're a lady, you had to like Wonder Woman. You know, you got all of those. You got the Spider-Man and Captain America. And those were the fictitious superheroes. But we have every day, honestly, the best superheroes we could have. And they are our firefighters, our EMTs, our policemen, our policewomen, our armed forces. Folks, those are everyday heroes. And very honestly, we need those everyday heroes because we live at risk every day. I got to thinking about that. We live at risk, but what are some of the safer places that we could be in this country? And so I looked up a survey. It was done by a San Francisco research group. They got their information from a risk management solutions, and they determined these are the cities that are the safest from earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, tsunamis. These are the two safest cities. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You ready for that? Go to Milwaukee or Mesa, Arizona. So why don't we all live there? You see, that's just it. There are others. That turned out tied for third place are Tucson, Phoenix, Cleveland, Ohio. That one blew my mind. And El Paso, Texas. Those would be the cities that you would presume would need the fewest everyday heroes. But even in the safest cities, there are risks. You and I live with risk. Have you been following the news around Indianapolis for the past week or so? You heard about the shootings downtown? You hear about the 200 teens that were up at Northeast Way Park? They broke out in gunfire up there? Folks, we live at risk. It's all around us. Every day we live at risk. Even as believers, we have risks. But listen, life isn't about avoiding the risk and the danger. It's not about minimizing that risk at all costs, but it's overcoming adversity and major obstacles, even in the midst of very worthwhile struggles. There are a few things I want to wrap up before ending the story of Esther. And we're going to talk about Esther's risk today. The risk of claiming who she was. The risk of coming to the forefront to be the champion for the people, for her people, the Jews. See, the last few chapters of the book look to the acts of the religious in the face of their wicked counterparts and all their evil deeds. The fact is that righteous people have far less to fear than wicked people. And why is that? Because righteous people don't bring a whole lot onto themselves. Where those who are not righteous many times will bring self-induced risk. So why? Why is struggling against evil and taking risk the responsibility of every one of us sitting here? What resources do we need to understand the risk that are involved in the fight that we're in the midst of? I want to give you three, what I believe very pointed things that we need to understand today about risk and about fighting and about taking the risk to people and not away from people. First is this: be strong to your advantage. Be strong to your advantage. In the book of Esther, in chapter 8, we'll begin in verse 1. It says, that same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Esther again pleaded with the king. Falling at his feet and weeping, she begged him to put an end to the evil plans of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she rose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and thinks it the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? Taking a risk. In our day and age, we can't understand or comprehend the risk that Esther took. There's nothing in our society today that compares to that. There is a story of a minister years ago. His name was George Ross, and he loved to tell the story about a woman in his congregation. She was just having a terrible time getting over her grief at the loss of her husband. She even went to see a doctor and said, you need to give me a prescription to help me deal with my melancholy. She said, every day I go to the cemetery and I put flowers on my husband's grave, but it doesn't help. It simply drives me deeper into grief. Give me a prescription to ease my pain. The doctor said, before I give you a prescription, let me give you a suggestion. Instead of placing those flowers on your husband's grave, why don't you bring them to the hospital? I have many patients in the hospital who nobody ever visits. And if you would visit them and bring them some encouragement with those flowers, it may be that you would bring a little joy into their lives. Strangely enough, even though she was resistant about it, she decided to do it and found that it was the turning point for her own healing. As she showed encouragement to others, she was able to drink deeply from the well of God's own encouragement. She took a risk. When we think about taking risk, most of us think it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage. But what is courage? See, courage is not the absence or the avoidance of fear or risk, but rather courage is summoning your strength to resist the fear. Anybody have any fears in their life? Oh, how about phobias? Right here. I'm as high as I ever want to be. I am petrified of heights. Now, I can fly in a plane, that's no problem because the ground's still at my feet, right? But don't ask me to get on one of them 360-foot roller coasters. That ain't going to happen. Don't ask me to get up here on this roof and repair anything. That ain't going to happen. I'm scared to death of heights. Courage is me overcoming that fear and doing what I need to do and take the risk. It's about taking the risk. You see, Esther felt that the risk was a little less now, so she could tell the king how she was related to Mordecai because the job with Haman was done and the enemy was exposed, so she could now breathe a little sigh of relief. But at times she felt like an imposter, I'm sure, a spectator, an outsider. I bet in public she had to bite her tongue, she had to bite her lips, grit her teeth. She had to wear a plastic face because she had to hide her grief and hold her tears. You see, this issue was not just merely about Esther and her family. There were many more lives at stake in this situation. But Esther finally showed her true colors. When her part was said and done, she was able to be who she truly was. Because when she showed her true colors, let's just say the dam broke. Right? The tears flowed. She just burst into tears as she revealed to the king her identity. Tears of relief. You ever have those? Tears of joy. Those are the ones you want to release. That's a great time. And that's what welled up in her, as we see in verse 3. And it might surprise you to know that the tears that she cried appears for the first time. You see, the Jews were weeping. All through the book, they're weeping. But there's two different words in the Hebrew for weeping. Because the Jews was a generic and it was just crying. But for Esther, it was a lot more than that. For Esther, it's like she cried out and lifted up her voice. Esther's was more dramatic, more emotional and intense. And now that things were over, she could afford herself to cry her eyes out after the fact. You ever been involved in a crisis? A crisis when your adrenaline just takes over? But when the crisis is over and the adrenaline stops, what happens? And the tears flow. The anxiety is gone. You can relax. That's exactly what's going on with Esther. And in the midst of that, she owned up to my people, my family. Now, family doesn't just mean her immediate family here. It has a lot of different meanings. It means the land of your birth, the household, the relatives, the natives, the children, my own people, my homeland, my ancestry. That word means so many different things in our English language. And up to now, she hadn't told the king that she was a Jew. But I don't think he would have cared. If you notice, when the king ordered Haman's execution, he only knew that he was harming Esther's people, but he did not know who Esther's people were. He didn't even bother to ask. He didn't ask Haman in the beginning who they were, and nor did he ask Esther when he changed it who they were. Something interesting happened along the way. You see, Mordecai had first told Esther about the plot that Haman hatched. And he urged her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and to plead with him. Who did she plead for? Her people. She didn't plead for herself. It was about everybody else. It was never for him. Mordecai, when he asked her to do it, it was not for him, but it was for the people of Israel. It was for the Jews. But when Esther did plead, she did include Mordecai, even though he did not ask her to, because she was so grateful for what Mordecai had done for her. We need to be strong in that advantage. The second thing we need to do is we need to be sensible to the advantage. Sensible. I don't know that there's a lot of sense left in our society. I'll call it common sense left in our society. It's just amazing. So it's very hard for some people to be sensible, but we've got to be sensible in the advantage we have. Listen to what we find here in the 9th chapter of Esther, verses 15 and 16. The Jews in Susa came together on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they put to death Susa 300 men, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Meanwhile, the remainder of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also assembled to protect themselves and get relief from their enemies. And they killed, listen to this, they killed 75,000, but did not lay hands on their plunder. Think about that, 75,000. And they only did it defending themselves. They were not out attacking, they were just defending themselves. There's a pastor named Fred Craddock. He told a story of a missionary who was sent to preach the gospel in India, and this was near the end of World War II. And after many months, it finally came time for him to come home on a furlough. Church wired him money to book his passage to go home, and back in that day, it was on a steamer to come across the ocean. But when he got to the port city, he discovered that a boatload of Jews had just arrived that were looking for a home because they were driven out of Europe. And so they were sailing all over the world just looking for a place to live. These particular Jews were now staying in attics, and they were in warehouses, they were in basements, they were all over the city. So it happened to be Christmas. And on Christmas morning, the missionary went to one of the attics where there were many, many Jews staying, and he just walked in and said, "Merry Christmas." And people looked at him as if he were crazy. They responded, "We're Jews." Then he said, "What would you like for Christmas?" In utter amazement, the Jews responded, "Well, we'd like to have pastries. Good pastries like the ones we used to have in Germany." So the missionary went out and used the money for his ticket to buy pastries for the Jews. Any Jew he could find in that port city. But then, of course, he had to write the church again. Say, "Hey guys, I spent the money. I need more money so I can get back to the States." And as you might expect, the church kind of responded and said, "Well, what did you do with the money we already sent?" That sound familiar? Yeah. And he wired to them that he'd use it to buy Christmas pastries for some of the Jews. And his superiors wrote back and said, "Why did you do that? The Jews don't even believe in Jesus." That's true. But I do. What a statement. It's not about me. You see, with all the killing in the land, the Jews had to have a proper perspective. They had to have a positive outlook because they needed to forgive the ignorance. They needed to forgive the uninformed and the clueless people who wanted to benefit by killing them. The ones that wanted to kill them, they were probably rioters and destitute, and they were hooligans. But the Jews had a lot worse people to worry about. They were called enemies. You see, the immediate concern was to protect themselves and to get relief from their enemies. The ones who had to take care of their families. They had to beware of the ones who would hate them for their race, their culture, their background, the society, the customs, the language, the appearance. Those are real enemies. Can I just ask a simple question? Do we have any enemies out there? Are there any enemies out there? The key that we got to understand is that we need to defend ourselves, but we do not need to attack. Vengeance is mine, thus saith Steve. No? But so many times in our defense, we lose sight of the fact that we are defending the name of Jesus, and we begin to look for revenge. And we see here from this example in the Jews, they didn't look for revenge. They just protected themselves. And we need to be prepared to protect ourselves. You see, in the Hebrew, the word is to stand for their lives and to have rest from their enemies. The edict gave the Jews not only the right to protect themselves, but to rest from the endless fear and the mindless terrorism. But it also gave them the opportunity to go on the offensive. If they wanted to attack their enemies, they could have, but they didn't. That was not their mindset. They were just in a defense mode. They didn't prey on the helpless. They didn't prey on women. They didn't involve bystanders, just the enemy. And even though these Jews gained upper hand in Mordecai's appointment and announcement, They didn't seek revenge, but only defended themselves against their enemies, those who attacked them. Not against their neighbors, not against their acquaintances, not anyone who befriended them. It was not a license to kill. If that were the case, they were no better than their enemies. Also, they were given the right to plunder their enemies with this new edict that was given, but they never exercised that right. They didn't want to provoke a backlash or generate more heat or pour gas on a fire or rub salt into the injury. They just wanted an assurance that they could walk the streets again without fear and take their lives back. That's all they wanted. But I think the key to any and all of this is right here. To be selfless in your advantage. To be selfless. You see, in chapter 10 and verse 1, as we flip another page, King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire to its distant shores. And all his acts of power and might, together with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king had raised him, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Media and Persia? Mordecai, the Jew, was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all Jews. There's a story of a king who fell gravely ill. And as each day passed, he grew worse and worse, and his doctors and wise men tried to cure him, and they tried cure after cure, and nothing seemed to work. And they were ready to give up when the king's nursemaid, she spoke up and said, "I'll tell you how you're going to save the king." She said, "If you can find a happy man and take the shirt from his back and put it on the king, then he will recover." So the king sent forth messengers, and they rode far and wide throughout the kingdom, and yet nowhere could they find a happy man. No one seemed content. Everyone had some complaint. "That stupid tailor, he made my pants too short. By the way, this food is terrible. What's wrong with the cook? Can't she do anything right? What's wrong with our children?" Miller grumbled to his wife. "They never do what we say. Can't they teach manners at school? And they make so much noise. Tell them to go outside and play. Hey, my roof's leaking," growled the candle maker. "Can't the government do something about that?" This ought not to happen. Everywhere they went, the king's messengers heard nothing but whining and griping. If a man was rich, he never had enough. If he was not rich, it was someone else's fault. If he was healthy, he had a bad mother-in-law. Oh, I need more than that. If he had a good mother-in-law, then he was catching a cold. Everyone has something to complain about. And then one night, the king's own son was passing a small cottage when he heard someone say, "Thank you, Lord. I finished my daily labor and I've helped my fellow man. I've eaten my fill and now I can lie down and sleep in peace. What more could I want?" The prince rejoiced to have found a happy man at last. And he gave orders to take the fellow's shirt to the king and pay the owner as much money as he wished. But when the king's messengers went to the cottage to take the happy man's shirt off his back, they couldn't, because the man didn't even have a shirt. Happiness didn't depend on what he had. Happiness and joy came from within. As I said before, all through this book of Esther, it's named after her, but yet Mordecai, his name appears 58 times. Esther's only 56 times. Mordecai's name was introduced 2 verses before Esther's, and the whole book plus the last chapter ends with Mordecai, whereas Esther's account ended the chapter before. Mordecai was remembered most of all as a selfless person. Mordecai did not merely do an unselfish act, he lived an unselfish life. He selflessly brought up his orphan cousin who had lost her father and mother early in life. You see, the Jewish people, when they told the stories years later, people remembered Mordecai for his greatness. But the book was written to detail his kindness. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening with her. Finally, there he was sitting at the king's gate. He sat there while Esther was in the court. When Haman bumped into him, and as far as Xerxes could remember. But I'd like to go back and read Mordecai's plea to Esther one more time, because you'll see that the word I is very unimportant to Mordecai. Esther chapter 4, verses 13 and 14. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, that you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will rise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this. Mordecai didn't say anything about protect me. He didn't say anything about you need to do this for me. You need to do this for his people. His plea to Esther was never about himself, but it was for others. You see, life was important to others. I don't think death was frightening to Mordecai. He was more concerned that other people might have a future, women, children, families. He never begged Esther or Haman for his life, but he was always begging for the Jews, for other people. He was so selfless. And Mordecai was an unlikely and unselfish role model, but he was a true everyday hero. The Jews held him in high respect, but he was really, as he saw it, merely doing his duty. He was not proud, conceited, arrogant. Mordecai was not a politician of any kind. As a matter of fact, his double-fold motto, when he was in office, was be good to the people, not their wealth. Also, he spoke up for the welfare of all Jews, not just for some of them, not just for the powerful, not just for the rich, the special interest groups, the powerful lobbying groups. He didn't speak up just for them. He spoke up for everyone. That was the story of his life. He raised Esther unconditionally, and he saved the Gentile king dutifully. And he lived his life nonchalantly. When you're out in the world and you see the wickedness, you see people talk down about God, right? What's that do to you? What does that bring up in you? Do you resent it? Does it hurt? Do you want at that time to repay evil for evil? Or do you want to overcome evil with good? Evil is doomed and is indicted by future tense associated with the wicked of the Bible. You know, a phrase that I use often when I'm finding conflict with people is, your responsibility is to always take the high road. And take the high road always means to overcome evil with good. Kill them with, hey, you know that phrase. Kill them with kindness. Look what happens to the wicked. I just pulled a bunch of scripture together here. Look at what it says. The wicked will be silenced in darkness. They will perish and will not remain in the land. They will have their fill of trouble and return to the grave. They will be brought down by their own wickedness and by calamity. He will die for his sin. And then there's even more. It says, God will rain fiery coals of burning sulfur on the wicked. He will destroy all the wicked. The power of the wicked will be broken. Their offspring in future will be cut off. Their longings and hopes will come to nothing. And the name of the wicked will rot. Their lamp will be snuffed out. Their stomach goes hungry, and their house will be destroyed. Now, I would grant to say that many of us in this room, and I'm going to raise both my hands, would prefer our timing over God's timing. Is that not true? I would like to see it my way and not God's way so many times, and what happens. And that's the case right here. God, I want to see stuff done. I want to see stuff done to the wicked now. But is that how God operates? Why is Jesus not returned? Because it's God's wish that none should perish. And so if that's God's wish, then our job is to go to the wicked. Not resentfully, not looking for revenge, but to be open and honest with the truth that we have because of what Jesus did for us. Jesus is the difference maker. I don't have any power at all in my life to change the heart of any person. I wish I did, because there are several people, even in my family, that I would love to be able to change their hearts. I can't change a heart. But as we discussed in elders meeting just last Tuesday night, we need to start praying more about God changing hearts. God's the only one that has the power, the ability to change hearts. So if you've got people in your circle of influence who need to know Jesus, then start praying now for an interaction with them in which they will hear what you have to say. Prepare the field, plow the ground, have it ready so that God can do his work when you show up. And then when you show up, if you've prepared the ground, then he's going to show up. My boss back at the children's home used to have a saying, he loved it when God showed up and showed off. And that's what will happen if we do our part. Not resentful, no revenge, but to love people to Jesus. That's what Esther did. That's what Mordecai did. And he did it for those around him. There are those around us that need the same love, compassion, care, and truth that Mordecai shared with those around him.